Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and I'm very excited to welcome Mark Lynn to the podcast today to talk about Nicholas and Alexandra, released 50 years ago in December of 1971. How are we doing, Mark?
Hello, I'm doing good. Glad to be back for, gosh, what is this, like the fourth or fifth time?
Yes, so I believe your first episode with me was Love Story, which was about a year ago.
Crazy.
One of the big Oscar contenders for 1970. And now you are back to talk about one of the big Oscar contenders for 1971, Nicholas and Alexandra. We also talked about Summer of 42, which I think I liked better than you did.
I think you did.
And we talked about The Cat O' Nine Tails. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. That's
and
right.
You were on this fantastic, you did a fantastic bonus episode with me. We talked about Frankenstein and Dracula 90 years ago, the 90th anniversary. We were a bit nerdy on that one.
Oh, big time geeking out over that. That was great.
Well, I mean, they were turning 90. What were we going to do? Look the other way?
God, it's incredible. I always think of those movies as being like 60, 70 years old. And it's like, no, they're old. God, we're getting old.
You're like, is Dracula hitting 75 yet? Oh, wait, no, it's 90.
It did a long time ago.
I find great pleasure in watching like really old movies where everybody involved in the movie is dead.
Right.
Like nobody, like everybody affiliated with this production is gone, but we still have it. Like it's still in the world, which I think is so cool. It's so cool about film and art.
Yeah.
When these people are gone, 100 years on, as long as they took good care of the film, it still exists. It's still out there, which is really cool. So thanks for coming back for your fifth or sixth time or whatever it's been to talk about this movie. You mentioned this title a year ago on the Love Story episode. I asked you what some of your favorite movies were, and you mentioned Nicholas and Alexandra, and I went, oh, that came out in 71.
So here we are.
I have to get Mark back, and then a year goes by, and then you probably were like, is Brian gonna reach out about this? Oh, there's the email. There it is.
There it is.
Yeah, because I was like, I feel like of the 5 Best Picture nominees for 1971, this is the one that probably most people don't know much about, right?
It's kind of overlooked. It is.
Yeah. I mean, this is like a big 3-hour historical epic. Big director, Franklin Schaffner. He had just made Patton, which won him the Academy Award for Best Director just a few months before this. He was actually filming this movie when he won Best Director for Patton, and he was in Europe filming Nicholas and Alexandra. He could not attend the ceremony. That's why if you watch on YouTube, like the Best Director category for Franklin Schaffner, that's why Carl Malden, who was in Patton, that's why Carl goes up and accepts the award on Franklin's behalf, because Schaffner was filming this movie, Nicholas and Alexandra. So what a couple years for this guy. I mean, Patton wins Best Picture. It's a very beloved historical epic. That movie was, I think, almost 3 hours, if not fully 3 hours. And then this one's 3 hours, 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Just in like a year and a half. Like Patton came out in the spring of 1970. This comes out at the end of 71.
Yeah.
Like these 2 epic films in less than 2 years. That's pretty insane.
Yeah. 2 epic historical biographical films. Yeah. This one didn't quite do as well as Patton did.
I know. Looking at the research, I'm like, this. I mean, it was nominated for Best Picture, and it's this big historical drama. Like, it must have done very well, and it didn't.
It
lost money.
Right.
So,
and there was a whole debacle with the producer, with Sam Spiegel, with the producer. Like, he was supposed to get a different director on board, and they had a falling out, because I think it was for Dr. Zhivago. I think. Yeah. He was supposed to be the producer on that, and then he had a falling out with that movie's director, and then he went, well, I'm going to do another, Russian revolutionary type film, and he got on board with Nicholas and Alexandra.
Yeah, so let's dig into it. So first, for our listeners who might not have any clue what this movie is all about, I just want to just share a brief synopsis here of a couple sentences. Let's see. So Nicholas and Alexandra tells the tragic story of Nicholas II, set against the backdrop of the Russian Revolution. It's an inside look into the private lives of Nicholas and his wife, Alexandra, their daughters, their only son, and the painful secret about their son and heir apparent, which bound the imperial couple to the mystical Grigory Rasputin. It's kind of like the gist of, like, the very brief gist of what the movie's all about.
Very brief.
And yeah, I mean, I could have gone on for another 7 minutes.
Of course.
I thought we'd keep it just like, I think that's where the listeners check out is once I'm on minute 3 of the running down the entire plot of the movie. And as I say often, the best way to listen to my podcast is to watch the movie first, because you'll get more out of it, right?
Right.
Because we like to spoil things often. We're going to talk about the last scene of this movie.
Which if it's a spoiler for you, you were not paying attention during your high school world history classes.
If it's an historical film based on true events,
there's no spoilers.
Really a spoiler. It happened.
You can go on Wikipedia and look this up.
Yeah,
it's not a spoiler.
So let's get into the research here. So the film was written by James Goldman and Edward Bond. It was based on a 1967 novel by Robert K. Massey of the same name. Film was directed, as I said, by Franklin Schaffner, who directed Patton. He also directed one of my favorite films, Planet of the Apes from 1968. That's so interesting to me that the same man directed Patton and Nicholas and Alexandra that made Planet of the Apes.
Quite a jump.
Doesn't really feel like the same guy.
Yeah, quite a jump.
So that's kind of interesting. So let's see. So as you were saying, producer Sam Spiegel tackled Nicholas and Alexandra when he was shut out from working with director David Lean on Dr. Zhivago, as you mentioned, which was also set against the backdrop of revolutionary Russia. Spiegel had alienated Lean when the two worked together on the film Lawrence of Arabia, one of the great movies of all time, pressing the perfectionist director in order to get the movie finished on time. Ooh, yeah, I don't think David Lean was the kind of director who you could pressure and like, let's hurry things up, Dave.
Nope, he wasn't the guy for that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few directors that you had to just let them go at their own pace. I think David Lean was one of them.
Yeah.
So Spiegel initially tried to make Nicholas and Alexandra without buying the rights to the book, claiming the historical account was in the public domain. But eventually he purchased the rights and hired writers to adapt the screenplay. That was an interesting tidbit, because I was like, right, if it's based on historical events,
yeah, you
have to buy the rights to the book. Like, can't it just be in the public domain?
It could. I don't think you probably couldn't call it Nicholas and Alexandra, because I've read the book by Robert K. Massey. It's kind of one of the definitive biographies of the last Tsar and his family, and all of this, especially at this time, because this was still in the era of Soviet Russia. So for an American author to be able to publish about them was not too much had been written about them ever since the Bolshevik takeover of Russia. And so the actual book it's not a novel, it's a historical book, like it's a biographical work. So, but yeah, I guess, they absolutely could have done a film about the Tsar and his wife, but they probably wouldn't have been able. Maybe the actual title was the one thing that, and it had been a pretty popular book, so maybe that's what would have drawn people in to be like, oh yeah, like that's been kind of a big book that's been around the last few years. So
yeah, that's a good point.
Assumption.
If people were fans of the book, it'd be easier to sell the movie if there was that awareness of the novel,
for sure,
of the book, rather than just calling it something else and nobody knows what's going on. I mean, not to say that it really helped, right? It was not a box office success.
Not really, no.
So thankfully, Robert K. Massey got to come into some money.
He did.
When they purchased the rights. Because he could have just said, "Oh, it's historical figures. We can just do it without the book." But it makes sense. I think if you're going to take a book that people know, you'd want to keep the title, keep it, and then there's that awareness for the audience. So the screenwriter James Goldman, he had written The Lion in Winter. He labored on draft after draft of Nicholas and Alexandra as directors came and went. So some directors that were either on board or considered: George Stevens, Joseph Mankiewicz, the man who made Cleopatra. After he saw Patton, that's when Goldman recommended, let's get Franklin Schaffner. That's when he came on board. So it was actually after Patton had been released, which I guess makes sense in the timeline, because I believe Patton was March of 1970, and I don't think they were shooting Nicholas till either the end of 70 or the very beginning of 71. So that would make sense. And I think, like, if you see Patton, you see a man who could make a movie like this.
Yeah,
like he's capable. So let's see. Spiegel. I keep wanting to say Spielberg.
I know.
Because it's got the SS.
Yep.
Spiegel had to work with stricter budget constraints from Columbia Studios than before. They didn't think this was going to be $100 million movie. Come on. He had wanted Peter O'Toole as Rasputin and Vanessa Redgrave as Alexandra, but was constrained. Notable actors such as Laurence Olivier, Michael Redgrave, Jack Hawkins appeared in the film, but actor Rex Harrison turned down a supporting role as too small. Rex Harrison, of course, from Dr. Dolittle and My Fair Lady. So he probably looked at like the script or the role and he was like, yeah, I'm a little bit bigger than that. I mean, he won an Academy Award for My Fair Lady. So
gosh, it's incredible that they were able to get some big Laurence Olivier. I mean, gosh, he's like the definitive British screen actor of the 20th century.
Yeah, and he pops off the screen in this movie. He's not in very much, right? It was the end. Just a few scenes.
He's in a very minor role. Yeah.
But that, like he, as I said in my notes, he is always the sign of a quality project. When you see Laurence Olivier, even if it's just briefly,
lends it some gravitas.
Lends it gravitas, exactly.
Yep.
The film marked the film debut of Janet Sussman, who would be Oscar nominated for her performance. This was her first movie. I guess she had shot a film before this, but it didn't come out until 1972. So this was the first film that she had appeared in that came out. And I'm always impressed by actors who their first movie they get an Oscar nomination. That's like it doesn't happen too often, you know, especially winning. And then I did not see him, Mark, but Brian Cox is in this movie in his film debut.
Brian Cox plays a young Leon Trotsky in the movie.
Okay. I'm kind like, did he look really different? Because I was looking for him and I never saw him.
I mean, you can sort of, I think it's in the voice.
Oh,
but
okay.
Again, but he's also in kind of a few short scenes because they do intersperse the revolutionaries that eventually rise up. They intersperse them into little bits here and there. And Brian Cox is playing Leon Trotsky, which is kind of funny, but it is sort of you kind of have to look closely. But I think for me, it was the voice. Once I heard the voice, I went, oh yeah, that is Brian Cox. Yeah.
He's been acting for many decades, obviously most well known now for Succession on HBO. When I see him, I always think of the villain he played in X2, X-Men United from 2003. Right. I always thought he was really great in that.
I also think of him as being in, this is a little more lowbrow, Super Troopers.
Super Troopers. He is in Super Troopers. I forgot about that.
Yes. That's such a great movie.
He's also amazing in Adaptation. I think for 2 scenes.
That's right. Yeah.
He plays, Robert McKee. He plays that story guru who does all the seminars and stuff.
Yeah.
And that speech he gives to Nicolas Cage is classic.
Yes.
When he's like, can a movie just be about flowers? No, it can't. Here's why. So the film was released in mid-December of 1971 by Columbia Pictures to mixed reviews and low box office returns. It made about $7 million on a $9 million budget. I was so amazed watching this. I'm like, this only cost $9 million.
Inflation.
I mean, I'm like, this looks like it costs $100 million.
Yeah,
but all of the sets and everything.
$9 million in 1971 was a little bit more sizable than it is now.
Like, I feel like today, a movie like this today would be The Last Duel by Ridley Scott, which came out in October, which also was not a box office hit. Historical epic with Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, Jodie Comer, Adam Driver. And I believe the budget of that movie was more than $100 million. So so it's times have changed, that's for sure. So despite the detailed production design, photography, performances from the cast, Nicholas and Alexandra failed to find the large audience it needed to be a financial success. I mean, why do you think the movie didn't do as well, Mark? Do you think why do we think it failed a bit at the box office?
That's tough. I mean, visually, it's sumptuous. I mean, the costume, the set design. I mean, that's probably where they blew most of their budget, was just on the look and the scenery of it. I mean, it's which they do an impressive job with, and you have to when you're talking about the Romanovs. I mean, you got to get the costumes, you've got to get the sumptuous backdrops. I don't know. It's hard to say. Because I've watched it multiple times ever since. I mean, I first came across it when I was about 12 years old. And
oh, cool. Okay.
And this is, I'm a history teacher, and this topic of the last Tsar and his family and the Russian Revolution. This is what got me interested in history. in the very first place.
Oh, cool.
And it's kind of funny though, because it was actually watching the 1997 movie Anastasia, the 20th Century Fox
the animated film
cartoon, which a lot of people think is Disney. No, it is not a Disney film.
No, it's not.
But it is kind of on par with, musically and animation wise. It definitely runs in the same rankings. I watched that. That's what first got me, introduced me to this whole topic of the czars and the Romanovs in Russia. And then I came across this movie by chance in a local video store, like 6 months after I had seen Anastasia, and then I got it. And then, this is obviously the more historical version of what actually happened to Anastasia and her family. But I don't know. So anyway, so the whole, why wasn't it a success? I think because the action, it's kind of low on action.
Right.
I mean, like the scenes, the scenes of the actual revolution breaking out are very minuscule. They're very brief, and they really, and I mean, I think if it had kind of been, like I said, I think they probably spent most of the budget on the costumes and the scenery, and then went, well, maybe we can't portray like thousands of Russian workers marching through the streets of St. Petersburg and riots breaking out. I mean, the actual revolution, when it appears in the movie, is kind of anticlimactic. But I don't know. So maybe people were sort of thinking that it would be more of that kind of a thing. And then, but in reality, it is kind of a pretty straightforward biographical look at these two people and their family. And so all of these things that happen around them are, they're obviously they're important and they're consequential, but their focus is really on the two of them. I don't know, maybe people didn't find that as appealing. I don't know. It's hard to say.
Well, I wonder, I mean, there aren't any big stars, at least in the leads. I wonder if there had been bigger names in the two leads. Like maybe that would have brought in more people. Yeah. December 71 is also very busy time at the movies. Like, yeah, I mean, I've been covering, what is it, 7 or 8 episodes I've done just on movies released in December of 71. I mean, this is the month of Dirty Harry, Diamonds Are Forever, Harold and Maude, Bedknobs and Broomsticks. I mean, some big titles. And I feel like it might have gotten a little bit lost in the shuffle. Maybe just one movie too many. I don't know.
Maybe after all those movies, this big historical epic, people just sort of went, Well,
yeah, I just feel like
interesting things out there.
What about the film would pull in a giant audience outside of it getting just like amazing reviews?
Yeah.
I mean, the movie got a Best Picture nomination, so it's not like it was ignored by any means.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting. How did you first, you said you saw it at 12. Like, where did you find this movie when you were 12?
I saw it in a video store.
It's just a video store. Okay.
Yeah, just in a random video store, and it said NICHOLAS and Alexandra, and I went, hey, I know them, because like as soon as I saw Anastasia, I begged my mom, take me to the library, and I was wanted to read
more on it,
and I just absorbed it. And so then I immediately saw NICHOLAS and Alexandra and went, wait a minute, that's the Tsar and his wife. And so then it just kind of spiraled from there.
Was it a double VHS?
It was. I still have it. If you'd like me to
you have
put it on camera here.
Do you have it?
I'd
love to see it. Yeah, that's awesome. Because I mean, for those of you who are old enough to remember in like the 80s and 90s, if you rented a 3-hour movie from the video store, you would get 2 video cassettes. So those of you just listening, he is showing me looks very old fashioned.
Yeah.
I love that you not only still have it, but you had it close enough by to show it to me. So wait, show me the cover real quick.
There's the cover.
Okay, so that's like a really old fashioned. I mean, that looks like 1987. That does not look like 1995.
No, definitely.
It looks like an older VHS set. That's interesting.
Actually, I mean, it says artwork and design 1983. So this edition, 1983. Yeah.
Wow. Do you have a VHS player?
I do. Yeah.
Does it still watch? Does it still play?
I think it does. I think I haven't used it in years, but yeah.
I don't know. Something tells me that, I mean, the sumptuous cinematography and the widescreen, I mean, I'm assuming that copy you just showed me, that is full frame, right? It's not widescreen. It doesn't, I mean, it's got to be a really low kind of quality version.
Maybe. Yeah. I don't know.
Because the version I watched last night on my giant TV, it just looked beautiful. And I feel like this one you would want to watch in better quality than a VHS.
For sure. Yeah.
I mean, some movies can get by with the full frame VHS, but I feel like this one looks a lot better. So I just have a couple last things for the research I did. So as I said, the critics were not super big on this one. Like at best, they were kind.
Yeah.
You know, someone said it was an inflated epic of occasional interest, mainly for its sets and generally heavy going. This critic gave it 1 star out of 4.
Ouch.
Another critic said Nicholas and Alexandra boast terrific performances and gorgeous production design, but it's bloated and unwieldy. There is more history here than the filmmakers know what to do with. A nicer review came from Roger Ebert, who I believe gave it maybe just 3 stars. I don't think it was more than that. He said the movie isn't exactly stirring. However, it's undeniably interesting, especially after the intermission, which I would agree. I like the second half more than the first. The first was kind of like,
there's a lot to get through.
It's a lot to get through. I feel like once I got to know the characters a little better, and I felt like the pacing, it went up a little bit in the second half, and leading us to that amazing ending. So the film received 6 Oscar nominations: Best Picture, Best Actress for Janet Sussman as Alexandra, Best Cinematography for Freddie Young, and Best Original Dramatic Score. The film won Best Art Direction and Best Costume Design. How do you not give this movie Best Costume Design?
Rightfully so, I think.
I'm like, I mean, there was some good costume design in 1971 movies, but this one was pretty spectacular. I mean, I don't know whether you like the movie or not. I mean, the costume design here is impeccable. It's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
The film also received 3 BAFTA award nominations: Art Direction, Costume Design, and Most Promising Newcomer for Janet Sussman. At the Golden Globe, Sussman was nominated for New Star of the Year, and Tom Baker was nominated for New Star of the Year, male, and Best Supporting Actor. The film was also recognized by the National Board of Review as one of the top 10 films of the year. So that is the research I have. Mark, anything else about this movie? Any trivia that I did not find, was not able to share?
No, I've covered a lot of it. I mean, the one thing that I just find interesting is that when the initial intention was to cast Vanessa Redgrave as Alexandra, and then it's funny that they ended up getting her father, Michael Redgrave, to play a small role in the movie. So that was kind of interesting. And it's funny because, I mean, for me, I don't know, these historical dramas and films are kind of like, this is what I really get into. And it's funny because a few of these actors, like they're sort of, you go, oh yeah, that's them. Like, for instance, Timothy West, he has a role as the doctor, the family's personal doctor that accompanies them all through the years and ultimately ends up in the very end of the movie with them, which I guess we'll get to in a little bit, not to spoil. Again, not that there's anything to spoil, it's historical knowledge. But he ended up playing in the I'm assuming it would have been I should look it up, but there was a miniseries, a BBC miniseries called Edward VII, which is about the life of Britain's King Edward VII, who, fun fact, was an uncle to both Nicholas and Alexandra. And he plays King Edward VII. So it's funny that he went from playing the doctor of Nicholas and Alexandra to a few years later portraying King Edward VII in this miniseries. So interesting. So just some of the characters you go, oh yeah, that's so and so, and like we already said, I mean, Laurence Olivier is in it. I mean, that's he's sort of the definitive British theater actor of the 20th century. So
going back to the 1930s, like he was around a while. I mean, by 71, everybody knew Laurence Olivier for sure.
Yes.
All right. So what are your thoughts on this movie? It's one of your favorite movies. Why?
I think because of that historical connection. I mean, and it's funny watching it again now. I do it. I can kind of go, all right, like I see where maybe like some of the critical reviews that you glossed over a few minutes ago. It's like, I can see where they were finding fault with it, that it is simply, it's a lot it is so much history to get through. that one review in particular that said there's so much history here that the filmmakers don't know what to do with. I mean, you're talking, because the movie starts in 1904 with the birth of their only son, Alexis, and then it ends in 1918
Okay.
And so you're talking about 14 years of history, but 14 years of just absolutely momentous, monumental change, and history. I mean, the Russian Revolution, World War One, so much dramatic change. And so at a point, you kind of have to go, how can you possibly fit all of this into a single movie? Which is funny because I think nowadays you see more historical films focusing, if they're talking about big events or big, or well-known historical names, they're going to chunk it down. They're going to focus on one particular aspect of that person's life or one particular period. They're not going to do an overview of 14 years of their life, the 14 years of their life that just happen to be the most dramatic and definitive moments of their lives. It's hard to fit into one. So I can see how the reviews about it being unwieldy and unfocused. As I was watching it, I went, yeah, okay, I can see that now. But it's got a special place in my heart because of, prompted me to study history, to get my degree in history, to become a history teacher. So it's hard to, it's hard to refuse it.
That makes sense. And I feel like if I was really interested in this period of history, like I think no matter how stagey or kind of talky the movie could be, like you're going to be interested in everything that happens in it. So I kind of see that from a filmmaking point of view. I did feel like the movie could have moved along a little bit faster. I felt like there were a lot of scenes in this movie where it'd be usually two men standing in a room talking, and Schaffner would just have a giant wide master shot.
Yeah. Oh yes.
And I'm like, okay, let's, So this period of history, I'm not as interested in as you are. And so I wanted like a character to really latch onto, like maybe a smaller scope, as you just mentioned, to like really get involved in a few characters rather than this giant ensemble. So that was my struggle, especially the first hour, was just trying to kind of find my bearings and get involved in the movie, because there are a lot of characters and there's kind of a staginess to some of the scenes that it kept the movie being super involving for me. I don't know.
Yeah, completely fair, I think.
But I like any movie where I don't recognize too many of the actors. I mean, just twice I was like, oh, Laurence Olivier, and then I went, oh, Ian Holm.
Yeah, Ian Holm. I forgot.
Ian Holm is great towards the end. He's like very young and but kind of this intimidating presence at the end, which I really love.
Yes.
But other than them, I was like, I don't know who any of these people are. And just like on a scale that this movie is, I will always appreciate a film that's 3 hours that has this kind of beautiful cinematography and costume design and just some impressive shots in this film, like especially exteriors. And I mean, there's a scene of gunfire that's really terrifying. There's this assassination scene that I thought was really powerful. And every time I'd be like a little bored, I'd be like, okay, this is getting kind of unwieldy. That there'd be something that kind of pull me back in. I was never completely removed at any point. There'd always be a little bit of a turn in the story where I'd be interested to see what would happen next. And I did think Janet Suzman was really terrific in this. I really did admire her performance. I'm happy it got Oscar nominated. It was really, really a solid performance.
I agree. Yeah.
So let's see. So any specific scenes in the movie you wanted to discuss? Like, what are your favorite parts of this movie?
Let's see. Well, I think the scene, what became known as the Bloody Sunday Massacre, where there were thousands of Russians who marched through the streets to go to the Tsar's palace to peacefully, they were coming in peace to peacefully present a petition to him, and then they were quite brutally mowed down by the guards of the Tsar. That was a pretty intense, that's probably the most action-packed scene of the movie, which is, again, I mean, even more so than the actual outbreak of the revolution itself, when it finally occurs later on in the movie. Like, that had far more action in it than the revolution itself. So that's a good one. I did enjoy the scene when Nicholas and Alexandra go to the party with the other members of his family, and then where Alexandra is introduced to Rasputin. I felt like that was yeah, I mean, the costumes are just absolutely on point. They're all in their finery with their jewels and tiaras and uniforms, but the dialogue exchange between Rasputin and Alexandra is really fascinating.
Yeah.
What's another interesting scene? I think the ending scenes, like the final maybe 10 or 15 minutes of the
Right.
movie when they are in their final prison, and the fate that ultimately befalls the Romanovs it's pretty powerful. It's a pretty harrowing scene.
Yeah, I mean, I had my issues with this film. I would say the last scene is one of the most powerful of any movie I watched for 1971. Like that's like the way it's filmed, like this, like the tension of just a camera pointed at a door, and then the men coming in and the reveal of the guns, and the way that he cuts out all sound except for the gunshots. Like we don't hear them scream. And the just terrifying choice to not show them be killed, except we get an image of the boy with a gunshot going through his cheek.
Yeah.
And then we cut back to the men and we only see the guns and the men. I'm like, that is terrifying.
Yeah. Right.
And it was not, I did not read up on my history, Mark. I did not expect that, like the movie to end that way. I was like, oh my God.
Okay. Yeah.
I guess I was falling asleep in history class when the teacher went over this period, because I was like, what?
Yeah. So spoiler alert,
credits,
everyone.
Roll credits.
Roll credits. That's it. Spoiler alert, everyone.
Spoiler alert.
And their whole family were executed by the Bolsheviks.
Yeah.
A year after the rebel in 1918. The exact date is July 17th, 1918.
Okay.
I know that because my birthday is July 17th.
There you go.
So there we go. Yeah. So that's a big finale to
what
Nicholas
did
Alexandra.
What did 12-year-old you think when you saw that last scene?
It was
one of my all-time favorites.
it was pretty jarring. It was pretty jarring.
I'm kind of happy I watched that scene at 37 and not at 12. I think at 12 that would have really messed me up a little bit.
I don't know what that says about me. I don't know what that says about me.
Because it's so real, and it's just, I mean, you've been with this family for 3 hours, and it's just like, what? It's really scary. And especially the way he filmed it and edited the scene. It's just really well done.
And then especially thinking about like when I would have first seen this movie when I was about 12, I would have been about the same age as the boy. Their son. He was about 13 going on 14 when he and his family were murdered. So that,
it's the kind of scene where whether you're kind of for or against the movie, I don't know how you walk out of this in 1971 and be like, like I feel like that last scene, it just like it's so striking. It's like you can't just ignore the film. Like you have to really dig into it, and you know, that last scene almost made, I mean, obviously I didn't have time, but it kind of made me interested to watch it again, knowing that that's coming. Like I feel like it would add some texture to the family scenes earlier in the movie, because I did not know that was going to happen.
Yes.
I like I mean, it has some swings in tone a bit, like the middle hour, there was like some whimsy to the movie. It's not all like deadly serious. Like there are moments with the family where it's a little bit more, it's not ever funny that much, but like it's not all like this deadly serious costume drama all the way through. Like there are moments of playfulness, which I admire too.
Right.
What do you think?
I think it's good for the family scenes, because I think it emphasizes that they were this very close knit family, which I think makes the tragedy of what happened to them just all the more heart-wrenching. Is that, and you know, and historically, like that, it is very, like, everyone that's written on this and studied this agrees that they were actually kind of surprising for a royal family of that time, that they were actually a very close-knit, very loving, you know, very warm family. Like it was not just, you know, the parents being stiff and aloof and, you know, we are the empress and the czar and, you know, good children, you know, we only see you once a day, you know, with your nannies. I mean, they really did have a very normal, so to speak, family life. And I think that just adds further emphasis to just how horrible it was that they all ended in this way.
So would you say the movie's pretty historically accurate? It doesn't have taking a bunch of liberties all the way through?
Actually, it is fairly accurate.
Okay.
It's fairly on the ball. There are, and the things that aren't accurate are very minor. Like the one, like for instance, I mean, and it's such a minor thing that only a massive geek like me would pick up on. The scene when his prime minister, he was a guy named Stolypin, the scene when they're at the opera and he is shot and killed at the opera, and the Tsar is up in the balcony with his daughters and then sees him being carried out with the bullet wound. He would have, because all of this was, that whole scene was taking place against the backdrop of the 300th anniversary of the Romanov dynasty's rule. And he was shot and killed, the prime minister, like that was accurate. He was assassinated, but that had happened like 2 years before the 300th anniversary. So something minor like that didn't actually happen during, he was already dead by the time they were doing all of these celebrations for the 300th anniversary. So again, minor details that a geek like me would point out. But for the most part, yeah, but there was nothing historically that was dramatically altered to be like, hey, now hold on, that's pretty jarring. Like, it was actually pretty faithful to the historical events.
If it had ended with them letting the family go in peace and safety, that would have turned you off a little bit.
I think so. Yeah, probably would have.
Does it bother if you're watching an historical epic film and it's a lot of it's inaccurate? Does that completely pull you out of a movie since you're a history buff?
It depends. If I feel like it's being done in service of the story, and if I feel like the rest of the movie has been handled with care, then I'm willing to let it go. If I feel like this is just sloppy and maybe you just didn't really do your research, then I have a problem with it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like, one of my favorite movies is Titanic, and a lot of that's historically inaccurate, but I don't really care because I just think the movie is so interesting.
Right. I agree. I would agree with you on that one.
Like sometimes, like the movie just sweeps you away to the point where it's okay that it's not all.
It's okay. Yeah. Whereas, like, I had some issues with Sofia Coppola's Marie Antoinette.
Oh, okay.
Which, and I've sort of tried to grapple with, because she did say in, the promotion and being interviewed about the movie, she did say, I wasn't trying to make a straightforward historical, biographical film about her.
Yeah.
Like, so yeah, like I took liberties with certain things here and there, but it was just really, I don't know, like in that case, I felt like, it's a little hard. It's a little hard for me to get on board with it.
Yeah.
Like,
sometimes
visually, I thought it was wonderful. Yeah. And then the fact that it ended before any of the events it ended right at the start of the French Revolution. It was just like, oh, well, now we're not even going to get to like the good stuff, so to speak. Like the movie ends right when the family is being removed from Versailles. So like,
yeah, I mean, you have to kind of, it's case by case basis. I feel like Sofia Coppola is not a director you would just assume like she would make a extraordinarily historically accurate film. Like she has a style to her filmmaking that you would expect there to be some liberties taken, like even before I saw the movie. So
sure,
kind of depends on who's making it. Franklin Schaffner, he's trying to get it all the way correct.
Yeah, and especially because he had kind of built up his credits with Patton. Just before this. So yeah,
which is another, I feel like, is another film that's pretty historically accurate. Like Patton is not a movie where every scene they're just throwing in a bunch of inaccuracies at the viewer. Like I feel like that one's pretty truthful as well.
Yeah.
Anything else you wanted to say about Schaffner's direction or the performances? Anything else in that realm that we haven't touched on? Like I think this is 1971. I feel like Schaffner didn't have to shoot so many of these scenes as stagey. I feel like there could have been a little bit more handheld, a little bit more style. It didn't have to be. I mean, there are moments of this film I'm like, this looks like it could have been shot in 1960. Like there's not a whole lot of like early 70s vibe. It has kind of like a stuffy quality at times where I'm like, let's be a little bit more playful, Schaffner. Like let's have a mix of more handheld or just something to make it feel more early 70s rather than 1963. Like just give it what's something you could give to it since it was made in this time period. I don't know. It just felt kind of like, I don't know if it was the pacing or just the camera locked off on sticks in the corner and just watching two people talk. And it's like,
yeah,
I feel like there could have been a little bit more style to the film. Not too much, but a little bit. I don't know.
I agree with you. Yeah, I agree. But then I also find that like when you watch this movie, I think you really do feel like you are in there. 1917 or 19 whenever, like you are in, and maybe kind of that staginess and that the direction kind of lends itself to that. does it make it the most fascinating or riveting film to watch? Maybe not necessarily. I still think that during like the actual like pivotal big scenes of the revolution breaking out and things like that, they definitely could have done more with it. But I feel like if nothing else, the direction makes the viewer feel like they are actually there. Like
that's a good point.
Because a lot of historical dramas, especially now that we're in an age of HD and everything is so, I mean, it's really hard to feel like you're in those time frames, because like you feel like you're watching a modern movie about these historical events. At least I feel with a lot of movies, and it's kind of hard to really imagine yourself as being there. Whereas I feel like this movie, it does kind of feel like you are actually there.
Yeah, no, that's a great point too. I mean, I'm thinking of Barry Lyndon by Stanley Kubrick, a historical epic film from 1975. And that's a film, beautiful cinematography, production design, costumes, and it makes you feel like you're really there in that time period. But there's also a directorial stamp and handheld and long zooms, and you can tell you're in the hands of a filmmaker with a vision who will risk some things at times and give you little playful moments of the cinematography, and the editing would like, it was not just a stagey movie, but I also would feel like I'm there. So I don't know, I just feel like there was something. Schaffner, to me, based on watching Planet of the Apes and Patton, is a director who's kind of just there to serve the story. I don't think he was a director who was like, what kind of a stamp can I have on this movie? And that's okay. Some directors didn't want that. And I feel like that's what Schaffner was going for. He just wanted to tell the story, and as you say, like, make you feel like you're really there with these characters. So in that regard, he succeeded. Yeah,
that's fair.
So my last question about the movie before we get to our final two segments is, I ask of each guest, like, if they were to make this movie now, how would it be similar? How would it be different? Like, was Nicholas and Alexandra ever made into a miniseries or a later movie? Do you know? Like, was this it? Like, was this like the main live action feature about this time period, these characters?
Let's see. I mean, there's been quite a few things done about this time period, about these people, the Romanovs. I mean, let's see.
Okay.
I think, the most recent example that I can think of is on Netflix. They had I don't know what you would call it. It's called The Last Czars.
Okay.
And it's a series on Netflix, but it's one of those, it's this new thing that I've been seeing in a lot of these, where it's a mix between a straightforward documentary and like dramatic recreations.
Okay.
And they're interspersing them. So you have the dramatic recreations of people acting out as if they are the actual, and then interspersed with commentary and narration that gives you the historical overview.
Oh, cool.
About what's happening. I was not a fan of it. I watched it because I went, and of course, everyone that knows me immediately reached out to me and was like, here you go. This is your bread and butter. And I watched it and I just went, oh, this is awful. This is dreadful. Okay. I thought it was terrible. So, but it does focus on the more or less the same time period. It goes back a bit earlier, talking about like when Nicholas and Alexandra get married, but yeah. But it's no, it was not very good in my opinion. They really hyped up the dramatics and the real everything was just much more heightened. And to me, it felt like putting a very contemporary gloss on something that it's like, well, that's not how life was back at this time, and that's not how it's. That's the thing with historical dramas, which is where I can either really latch onto one or I'm completely turned off by it. It's like, if you're trying to present this story or these people through a contemporary lens in a way that feels inauthentic, then I'm going to be turned off by it. Whereas, like, present the people as they actually would have been, like saying things that they actually would have said, or thinking things, or reacting to things that they actually would have, instead of, well, here's this character that lived 100 years ago, but they're going to be saying things in a way that someone in 2021 would have said, or reacted in a way. And it's like, well, that's just not, that's not how it works. That's not, you can't do that. At least I don't think you can.
Yeah.
That's just me. I'm a bit of a purist, so
That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about it. I'm like, there's no way you could make a feature film today based on this material. Like if you were going, unless you were going to focus on just a small piece of it, I feel like it would have to be a limited series. Like the only way to do it.
Yeah, or with Lincoln, Steven Spielberg's Lincoln from 2012, I believe it is, focuses just on a few years, and it focuses on a specific, event, like focusing on him trying to get the amendment passed that's going to abolish slavery. So I think historical dramas nowadays are focusing in on very specific parts of a person's life rather than doing this sweeping overview of 14 to 15, 20 years of a person's life. You don't really see that nowadays.
Yeah, I think Tony Kushner's like first draft of that script was like 600 pages long. And Spielberg was like, I think we might want to shorten it.
Yeah, probably.
Like, I don't know how many months or years Kushner worked on that thing, but I feel like once the script gets past page 500, it's time to like start cutting.
Yeah. Sorry.
Unless you're gonna make a limited series. But yeah, I mean, I feel like it's not. I mean, you say you watched one recently, The Last Czars. I feel like in the next 10 years, it wouldn't surprise me if there was a Nicholas and Alexandra 8-episode or 10-episode Netflix series. And I feel like there would be, not to say that most people, I'm not sure, know this 71 movie. It's not one of the more well-known films of the early 70s, but I feel like there would be some interest in that if it was done on like a really high scale with great production value and costume design. I feel like people would be interested. And maybe it could have some more sex, make it like Bridgerton.
Well, see, that's what they had in this Netflix in The Last Czars. Okay. I just went, ugh, like, no. But that's just me. I guess I'm old fashioned.
Some people that'll keep them going till episode 3 or 4. I don't know. But yeah, so I'd be curious to see what they do with it now. It was really, really great to talk to you about it. I mean, I don't know how many guests I could have found, Mark, who this is in their top 5 favorite movies of all time. So that's kind of cool. I just think that's really neat. That I feel like some people might have been kind of meh on this movie, and it was really cool to have someone who is really passionate about it. And I feel like it's a movie that more people need to watch, like especially like costume drama, historical epics of the early 70s. This is not going to be one that many people know. So I'm happy to kind of highlight it with this episode, which is fantastic. All right, that takes us to our final 2 segments. The first one's called the Divine Double Feature. If you were to, I mean, it's a long movie, so I don't know how many people are going to put on something right after it's over, but like, what's something more modern you would tell people to put on right after this ends, like to really make a cool double feature?
All right, this was kind of a tough one because I've got like, I had like 3 options floating around, and I kind of had to. So my first option, my first choice would have been like, just for fun, like just for the heck of it, put on 20th Century Fox's 1997 Don Bluth adaptation of Anastasia. Like if you want to take more or less the same story, but just have it told from a completely nonsensical, Disney-fied, even though it's not Disney, animated musical, and the music is fantastic. I mean, I think this has one of the best music of any of the animated musical films of the 1990s. So
are you ready to be astonished, Mark?
Do that. Yes.
I've never seen that movie.
You've never seen it?
I've never seen, and I was 13 when it came out. And I mean, was I really that much of a, like, just because it wasn't Disney, I feel like I didn't make the effort to go out and watch it. And it was one of those that fell through the cracks. I've never seen the 97 animated Anastasia.
Well, maybe you should.
I should. It's going to be celebrating 25 years.
Oh my gosh. Crazy.
2022 is the 25th anniversary of movies that came out in 1997, which is just so insane.
Oh boy.
That was like my first 1997, I would say, was like my first big year where every weekend I was going to the movies. Like I saw everything. So why didn't I see Anastasia? I promise I will get to Anastasia in 2022. I'm going to check it out at some point here in the months to come, because it is a movie I feel like it's come up on the podcast before. I feel like I've heard people talk about it, and I'm like, how have I never seen this one? So now that I've watched Nicholas and Alexandra and kind of a little bit more familiar with this period in history, like I'd be curious to see what they did in the animated realm. Meg Ryan, right? Isn't Meg Ryan the star?
Meg Ryan, John Cusack, Christopher Lloyd is Rasputin, which
oh,
is
that's
hilarious.
A good choice. I love Christopher
Yeah.
Lloyd. All right, cool. What are some other picks?
So I was also going to think, okay, a little more seriously. Maybe you could pair this with The King's Speech from 2010.
Oh, good choice. Okay.
So talking about, royalty, biographical. There's some family connection here because King George VI, who the movie focuses on, was a distant cousin of the czars, of Nicholas and Alexandra. So there's that, and then it's all, it's a little more lighthearted. It's a little more bouncy than this movie. Or I was also going to think maybe because I feel like a lot of people have probably seen The King's Speech. It was the Best Picture winner. It was a relatively sizable box office hit. So for maybe if people wanted to explore something a little less well known, then maybe go to I believe it was 2017 or 2018's Victoria and Abdul.
Oh, with Judi Dench.
With Judi Dench in her second performance as Queen Victoria.
Right.
She first appeared
after
as
Mrs. Brown.
Mrs. Brown from 1997, which she was nominated for Best Actress for.
Another 97 film.
Another 97 film, yeah. And there's an even closer family connection royally because Queen Victoria was the grandmother of Alexandra. Okay. So if you wanted to look at a brief, and again, like these later historical films, it focuses on a brief part of, this focuses on the friendship that Victoria had with an Indian guy. I don't want to say servant. Many people thought of him as a servant, but he was sort of a combination of like a private secretary, confidant, teacher, and they developed this unique friendship, and he exposed a lot of Indian culture to her. And this was also in the waning years of her life when she was sort of losing her mental faculties and dwindling, and people were like, you need to maybe retire. And so, so I felt like if you're interested to learn a little bit more about, this similar time period, Queen Victoria died in 1901. So the events of this movie of Nicholas and Alexandra, I should say, take place after that. But again, this is, you could watch Nicholas and Alexandra and then look at the life of her grandmother, Queen Victoria, as portrayed by another well-known legendary actress, and who also got an Oscar nomination for playing this part. She wasn't nominated for Victoria and Abdul, but she was nominated for playing the same character before. So I don't know, maybe that would be a good choice.
So if you can't make up your mind, listener or viewer, just go with all three.
You got three options.
Watch them and watch all four of the movies just in order.
Quadruple feature. There you go.
Yeah, The King's Speech. I really like The King's Speech, but I always struggle with that one because The Social Network was such an amazing movie. And when I think of King's Speech, I always think they picked Tom Hooper for Best Director over David Fincher.
I mean, I was happy with it winning Best Picture over The Social Network. That's just me.
Oh, you didn't like Social Network?
I thought it was fine, but again, I'm biased. It's a royal biographical film, of course.
Yeah, no, it's a good film. And Colin Firth was amazing in that movie. He was great. Yes. I was happy to see him win. So those are great choices. I was like, what's a modern or what's a film I've seen in the last few years that had great production design, costume design. It's kind of an historical drama of some kind. And my favorite of the last 5 years is The Favourite from 2018.
Oh, that would have been a good one,
with Emma Stone and Rachel Weisz and Olivia Colman, who won Best Actress in a shocking upset over Glenn Close. And I remember at that time, I was like, oh man, Glenn Close missed out, but Olivia Colman is so amazing in that movie. You can't deny it. And I'm not a big costume drama fan, but that movie, I don't know why, I just loved every minute of it. So I feel like after Schaffner's Nicholas and Alexandra, I feel like you'd want something a little bit more playful, a little bit more tongue-in-cheek, some dark humor, some sexuality, but also a sumptuously made movie with the cinematography and the costume design and production design. I think a cool one to follow this up with, to look at a film made almost 50 years on, would be The Favourite. Yeah, would be a fun choice too. All right, so our last segment, Beyond the Flick, we're talking historical epics. It's kind of a broad thing. I mean, you could kind of it can be any time period, but movies, I would say at least 2.5 hours or longer. Those kind of big historical epics from classic Hollywood or today. Like, what are 2 or 3 that you really love? Like, besides Nicholas and Alexandra, what are some other ones you come back to time and time again?
Oh, I mean, Titanic's a big one. Yeah. And it's funny because I came across Nicholas and Alexandra in, let's see, I was 12, so it would have been 1998-ish, 1998, 1999. And that, of course, was when Titanic was the biggest thing in the entire world.
Titanic, also 97, a lot of 97.
Yeah, also 97. Also double, it wasn't on DVD yet, so double cassette, just like Nicholas and Alexandra. So
that's right.
I had to do that same thing. Those are the 2 movies that I honestly went between for a good like 6 months when I was about 12. It was Titanic and Nicholas and Alexandra, and then 4 cassettes worth of movies between the 2 of them.
And you could just like blindfold yourself and just pick one of the 4 cassettes and put it in and just see what happened.
Yeah, and then I'd be perfectly happy with it.
It's the second half of Nicholas. We're good.
Yeah. The second half of Titanic was always, which I think most people agreed, that the second tape, although if you didn't grow up with Titanic being released on VHS, you may not know this, but for those of us that grew up with having the double cassette of Titanic, it was always the second tape's the more fun one.
Oh yeah.
That's what, like, the sinking's happening, and it's all the action and the tragic romance and like all that. It's the first tape ended like right before the tragedy and the action begins. So once you put on tape 2, that's like it's like the rest of the movie. Yeah. Oh, I can tell you because this is how good my memory is. It ends right when the captain turns and says, "I believe you may get your headlines now, Mr. Ismay."
That's
and then
correct.
It goes black, and then the tape
cuts
ends
to black. Yeah.
Right after they hit the iceberg, and then it's time to pop in tape 2.
Yeah. No, Titanic's a great choice. Any others that you really love? Historical epics?
Let's see. I mean, historical epics, I don't know. I'm trying to, I mean, there's been ones, probably wouldn't be considered epics because, yeah, we didn't really see a whole lot of them.
Right.
As especially, in the 90s and the 2000s. I mean, I love The King's Speech. I loved Mrs. Brown. I loved, there is a mini series, so maybe not historical epic, but like you said, like maybe these are best done through the lens of a mini series. There is a BBC mini series from 2005. It was called The Lost Prince, and it is about the youngest son of King George V, who suffered from epilepsy and they believe was probably on the autistic spectrum, and he was sort of hidden away because he couldn't be seen out in public with the rest of the British royal family.
Okay.
His mother, Queen Mary, was portrayed by Miranda Richardson, and she does a fantastic job. I think she got an Emmy or Golden Globe nomination for that performance. But it's interesting because it also ties, because King George V was a first cousin of Nicholas and Alexandra, and there's a few scenes in this miniseries where they show the 2 families visiting one another, and they also have a reenactment of the execution of Nicholas and Alexandra and their family.
Oh, okay.
So this one, yeah. So maybe not. Yeah, I guess it can be considered an epic because it's a miniseries. So it's like if you watch it all in one sitting, you're watching like 4 or 5 hours. All at once. So
yeah,
I enjoyed that one a lot.
What's it called again?
The Lost Prince.
The Lost Prince. Oh, cool. From 05.
Yeah. BBC, I believe it's BBC. I could be wrong, but UK, somewhere in the UK, miniseries from 05.
Yeah, I would, in my top 3, I would say Titanic, and my favorite like old school historical epics would be Ben-Hur from 1959 with Charlton Heston, and Lawrence of Arabia, which we mentioned at the beginning of the episode. David Lean, I like some of his other films. I think Lawrence of Arabia is like his masterpiece. And I think I mentioned this on the podcast before. I got to see Lawrence of Arabia on the big screen a few years ago. And it was there were like 10 other people in the theater, and it was like the biggest screen we have in Reno. And it was the full 4-hour epic on the big screen. It was just looked beautiful. And it was one of the most stunning movie-going experiences I've ever had. And so I would definitely put Lawrence of Arabia up there. I also like Braveheart with Mel Gibson's Braveheart from the 90s.
Right.
And it's not a great movie, but I do think Cleopatra from 1963, a movie that had so many problems and all sorts of issues. The fact that anything of merit reached the screen to begin with, I do, even though it's about an hour too long, but there's a lot of just really entertainment. Like it's like a perfect example of like an entertaining historical epic is Cleopatra, for Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor and Rex Harrison, just three great actors, kind of hamming it up here and there. But I love the detail in that movie. Like, it was the most expensive movie ever made up until that point, and you can see it on the screen. And it's just a great historical document of like filmmaking history of like what they were able to accomplish in the early 60s and put in the movie. It was just really, like, I feel like if you're interested in film history, even though some of it was controversial and some of it didn't work out the way they wanted it to, I do think you owe it to yourself to see the Cleopatra from 63. But I would say Titanic, Ben-Hur, Lawrence of Arabia, those would be in my top 3. Have you seen Ben-Hur and Lawrence of Arabia?
I haven't actually. No.
Ooh, you have a double feature.
There you go. I do. Yes.
Yeah, get like the really nice like Blu-ray of the two. Like, watch them in the best way you can. That's the way to watch those two. But they're just stunning pieces of work. All right, Mark, that takes us to the end here. Thanks so much for being my guest again on Film at 50. Do you have anything you'd like to promote, or anywhere you want to tell our listeners they can find you online?
I mean, I'm just a humble teacher trying to survive this weird year.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure you can relate to.
Oh, yeah.
This winter break has been very much needed. But yeah, I mean, you can find me on Instagram. My handle is @_schmerk, SCHMERK. You know, nothing special on there. But if you're interested in reading my, ridiculous Instagram stories that I occasionally post, then feel free to check me out there.
And watching him dance while he bakes.
Oh yeah, I haven't done that in a while. Yeah, haven't posted one of those in a while. I've had no time. I've had no time, so maybe I'll do that later today. We'll see.
we've been so busy, but as always, it was a treat to have you on, Mark. If there's any 1972 releases that you love, let me know. I'd love to have you on in the months to come.
Great.
And so thanks for being here. Thanks to all of you for listening. You can find us online at filmat50.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.